Labor leader Bill Shorten this week endorsed trade union attacks on the Abbott government's free trade agreement with China, saying it could threaten Australian jobs. The government has called the union campaign dishonest and xenophobic and condemned Labor for gross hypocrisy. The trade agreement has been secretly negotiated for most of the past decade under both coalition and Labor governments. And as Matt Peacock reports, even export-oriented industries are voicing reservations about the process as the fine details of the agreement emerge.
G'day. You know, I sell one heck of a lot of motor mowers, which of course makes the wife happy, and right here's the best of them.
An Australian icon, a Victor lawnmower for the past 60 years, a staple in most Australian backyards.
Victor is the #1 most trusted brand in Australia. We are the only manufacturer of mowers left in Australia.
But Victor's market dominance is about to come under serious threat from cheap Chinese mowers, a result of the free trade agreement with China.
The Australian consumer is very discerning, and they've purchased those products before and been burned by those products before.
The free trade deal between China and Australia was announced last year, and it's been a decade in the making. But details of the final terms are only now emerging, and in many quarters there's considerable concern, not just about imports, but cheap labour.
You'd think a free trade agreement with China would be a good thing.
The union movement has moved quickly to mobilise Australian workers against the trade deal.
Tony Abbott made a choice. He just didn't choose you.
Tony Abbott's decided that he's going to be on the side of Chinese industry and Chinese jobs and not the Australian construction industry and Australian construction workers.
There is no doubt that the trade union movement is being racist with respect to China. The trade union movement, and unfortunately Bill Shorten, the Labor Party, think that they're on a political winner here. They think it's easy to stir up trouble in relation to China.
No way can Labor simply just be expected to rubber stamp a deal which sells out Australian jobs.
$150 million projects with less than 15% Chinese investment can access new provisions, new flexibilities to bring in Chinese labour. That's a massive threat to Australian jobs. It's a real threat to competitiveness, good skills and good jobs in the construction industry.
The government's rejecting the union's scare campaign, stating that overseas workers can only be used under strict conditions.
The project agreement stipulates that they must use domestic workers. In other words, they've got to use Australians first. So Australians actually have the priority and have the preference in terms of these agreements. Australians must be used where possible, and it's only if there's a shortfall of skilled Australian workers that they then would look at being able to top that up with workers from abroad.
All foreign workers coming into Australia under the agreement would require government approval.
Imagine a situation where Australian workers on Australian construction projects have to have absolute confidence in Tony Abbott and Andrew Robb looking after their interests.
If you look at what the Labor Party itself has done in previous FTAs, you'll see that the safeguards that protect Australia's national interests today under the China Free Trade Agreement aren't different to the safeguards that were put in place in terms of our labour force under the Chile-Australia Free Trade Agreement, which Labor itself introduced.
There are a number of pieces of legislation that can come forward where we get to examine the veracity or otherwise of the Minister's comments with respect to the protections for workers in this country. We'll use the Parliament in the way it was intended, where the opposition will hold the government to account for the commitments it's made.
Look, any FTA is going to have winners and losers. Some sectors will win, some sectors will lose. Within sectors there'll be winners and losers depending on how companies are set up.
And one of the winners in this case is the family-owned manufacturer Sutton's Tools.
Well, China's one of the largest consumers in the world for precision tooling, and our major customers in China go across electronics, automotive, aerospace, in particular micro-threading tools for iPhones, iPads, assembly, that sort of thing.
For Robert Sutton, there can't be too many trade agreements.
It's a disadvantage for us not to be in a free trade agreement. We don't have any significant duties on our product coming into Australia. So in certain markets, when we go to compete against primarily first world producers, Japanese, German companies, American companies, it's a disadvantage. If they've got a free trade agreement with that destination and we don't, then we're disadvantaged.
But for Victor Lawnmowers, it's a different story. They're racing against time, preparing for the removal of a 5% tariff and a flood of imported Chinese mowers. They won't go down without a fight.
I think there's a temptation for consumers to gravitate to low prices, but Australian consumers take a lot of pride in their lawn care, and they want something that they can feel confident in. And when that machine lets them down, history suggests that they buy something of quality.
Like many manufacturers, Victor wanted more involvement when the trade agreement was being negotiated.
I think that it wasn't an overly transparent process that didn't allow us maybe the forum to participate as we would have liked.
We have strong concerns about the lack of real consultation that occurs between negotiators and industry. There hasn't been enough consultation, and it's only after the agreement's been signed that we can see the real fallout. So have we seen enough details? Well, we're still all sifting through the detail of the agreement, and that's unfortunate.
For the government, though, it's a win-win.
Us having world best market advantage when it comes to a significant major player like China really does represent the future for our nation, and hiding behind tariff barriers and tariff wars is a short-run approach that ultimately impoverishes the Australian people.